So this is a video I've been wanting to do for a while, but for some reason I never really got down to it, but here it is. And today I'm going to be ranking every Cobra Kai season from what I think is the worst to the best. Keep in mind that while I do have my reasons for these rankings, these are just purely subjective and just based off my opinion and what I prefer. And so without further ado, let's get into it. Starting off at last place, and what I think is the worst Cobra Kai season is season 2. This doesn't mean I think season 2 is bad, simply that it's my least favorite. I'll start with what I liked about season 2, which was Johnny and Miguel's bond become even stronger this season, especially that scene of Johnny telling Miguel how he failed Robbie at the diner, as Johnny realizes the error of Cobra Kai's old methods and tries to make Miguel into a more honorable fighter than he himself was when he was younger, which was at risk due to the return of John Kreese. And speaking of whom, I love that season 2 humanized Kreese and gave him more depth than he ever received in the original Karate Kid movies. His complex dynamic with Johnny resulted in great character development for both characters. Tori's introduction to the season was also great, as she ends up becoming one of Cobra Kai's best written characters, as she's introduced this season as Sam's nemesis. The final fight at the school was, in my opinion, one of the best, as we've had so many different fights going on, all the chaos, and of course, the ending. Finally, the slice of life stuff was greatly appreciated, especially the scenes with Johnny and Daniel together, and them finally bonding, as well as Johnny and his old Cobra Kai gang meeting up. Now for the cons of this season, so many characters were underutilized, such as Aisha, who went from being one of the most important characters in season 1 to becoming a background character being overshadowed by both Tori and Sam. Hawk was also another character that I believe was done filthy, not necessarily to his character, but more so because despite getting portrayed as a threat and having a cocky attitude, he lost pretty much every single fight this season. When it comes to threat level, I believe Kreese could have also been treated much better, as he was introduced to be the villain of not only season 2 but also season 3, and in his first fight nearly dies to Johnny, which was a little disappointing as he wasn't really able to showcase much during the Karate Kid films, and him almost dying to Johnny in the first episode really reduced his seeming threat as a villain. In terms of romance, this was also by far the weakest season, with the most prominent example being Robbie and Sam. Like, this was just disgusting, and my man Robbie was being played, which led to him kicking Miguel off the balcony. While Miguel and Tori were more tolerable, it was clear that it was a rebound, which also resulted in the school fight thanks to Miguel and Sam. Overall in this season, while Johnny, Miguel and Kreese shined, every other character was made worse and put to the side, while also being unable to maintain the same slice of life / karate balance that season 1 did. At 4th place, or second last, this is going to be a very controversial take, but here at number 4 I have season 5. Many people place season 5 as their favorite season, but I personally don't see it, and I really think it's because of recency bias. While it was a good season overall, there were so many flaws that stood out, but before I get into that, what I really liked about season 5 was definitely the fight choreography. I truly believe this was Cobra Kai's overall peak in terms of action, from Miguel vs Robbie, to Johnny vs the Senseis, to Daniel vs Terry, and especially Chosen vs Terry. I really loved all of the fights this season, and another aspect of season 5 that deserves praise is really the exploration of Cobra Kai's history and the lore behind it. We finally get to see Kim Sun-young in a flashback, more about Kreese and Terry's history, and the theme of legacy. Chosen's inclusion this season was also great, as he provided a lot of strength for Miyagi-Do and had plenty of funny moments. Terry was also a fantastic villain. Thomas Ian Griffin's acting truly stood out, as he goes from composed and calculating to eventually losing his mind and becoming unhinged at the end. As for individual characters, I believe Tori and Sam both stood out, as Tori continued to receive great writing and development, and Sam finally coming to understand Tori, and then becoming allies for the first time in the final battle was a great move by the creators. Now onto what I disliked about this season, and this is something I know everyone will agree with me on, is Kenny being Cobra Kai's main fighter. This was just a horrible decision, not only due to Kenny's rapid progression, but also because he does not look like a believable threat. He's a 5'4" skinny high school freshman, and we were supposed to believe that he could pose some sort of threat to nearly grown men, but even more so that he succeeded, as he was able to incapacitate Hawk during their match. And speaking of whom, as I explained in my video on whether season 5 ruined Hawk, he went from being the All Valley champion and having the best character arc in season 4 to becoming a side character losing to a kid. And yes, I know there are reasons why this happened, the ref, him cheating. It still doesn't excuse this horrible blemish on Hawk's character. Kenny's character development is also very generic by Cobra Kai standards. Like, yes, we know Cobra Kai's evil, Cobra Kai turns you evil and makes you a bully. Yeah, we've seen this many times before with Johnny in Karate Kid 1, Hawk in seasons 2 and 3. Kenny just failed spectacularly on every level to be a believable threat. Hell, I think even Kylo would have been a better option because we know that he's not only had previous combat experience with his wrestling, but actually looks like he could pose a threat. Ideally, bringing in Sean would have been the best option as well. Now, for the adults, I found the new senseis to be extremely disappointing. None of them had any character at all and were pretty much just NPCs standing in the back. Kim Da-eun's lines also made her sound like a Sith Lord from Star Wars, and really the only redeeming quality at the start was their combat power, as it took both Johnny and Chosen to team up in order to beat Yan Wu. They had all of this hype, only for all of them to get folded by Johnny in the finale. The dynamics were also all over the place this season, with Season 5 abandoning the relationships between Amanda and Tori and Johnny and Sam, which were established in Season 4, but by far, what made the least amount of sense was Miguel and Robbie becoming friends as quickly as they did given their history. Like, Miguel stole his dad and his girl, and Robbie nearly crippled Miguel. Them suddenly becoming all buddy-buddy just felt forced and unnecessarily rushed, which is found to be a common theme this season. Everything felt rushed. It felt like the creators were trying to jam everything all at once, which led to some characters being done dirty and a bunch of ill-paced character arcs and improper development. While I do like Season 5, especially the fight choreography, it definitely suffers the most from pacing related issues. At number 3 in the middle is Season 3, and for a while I used to think Season 3 was the worst season, but upon rewatching it I realized that it's actually not as bad as I remembered it being. Miguel's injury allowed for even more bonding with Johnny as he went through physical therapy. His injury also left him in his most vulnerable state since early Season 1. I also like that Miguel and Sam rekindled their relationship, as their small feud in Season 2 was very petty and they didn't really have chemistry with anyone else. Season 3 also marked the beginning of Robbie's Darth Vader arc, as he was sent to juvie where he was jumped, and after feeling betrayed by both Daniel and Johnny, would use Kreese's strike first philosophy to get through his fights in juvie. He also finally got a haircut, making him instantly a much better character. Kreese taking over Cobra Kai and becoming the main villain was also great to see, as we're able to see the influence that he has over his students, teaching them the same no mercy mindset that he taught all those years ago. Perhaps the student most influenced by this was Hawk, who went full Demon Time mode this season, and I really enjoyed his beatdown of Brox, getting his revenge on his bully, and then staring down Kylo. The highlight of this season was definitely Johnny and Daniel teaming up on Kreese in the finale, and this in my opinion was one of the best fights, as it's symbolic with Johnny rejecting Kreese's influence, and while he's off guard it looks like Kreese is about to kill him, but then Daniel comes in and saves him, which is definitely a callback to when Mr. Miyagi saved Johnny in the parking lot. Just how Season 5 had Mike Barnes, Season 3 reintroduced Chosen and Kumiko, as Chosen helps Daniel find his balance, even teaching him about the history of Miyagi-Do and teaching him the secret Miyagi-Do pressure points. As for the cons of this season, I found Tori and Sam's characters to be very lacking, as Tori becomes a very generic and cartoony villain, almost like a boogeyman, and Sam just continued to be an unlikable character, making it difficult for viewers to sympathize with her PTSD arc. Kylo was also a bit of a disappointment, as during the Season 3 trailer, he was somewhat hyped up to be a threat due to his wrestling training combined with Cobra Kai training, but ended up being a complete jobber, losing to Miguel in an ass-pull victory. Cobra Kai is a show that shines with character chemistry, which was clearly lacking this season. With Miguel in the hospital, Robbie in juvie, and Tori on probation, Hawk was the only prominent Cobra Kai student in the earlier parts of the season, thus having no one to really interact with besides Kreese. Sam and Dimitri also were not interesting enough to carry Miyagi-Do either, so both dojos suffered in the earlier part of the season. Overall, in my opinion, Season 3 was a great season, with many callbacks to the original films, as Miguel, Robbie and Hawk being developed in their own ways, but still suffers from issues regarding character development and chemistry. At number 2, and what I think is the second best season, is Season 1. I'm just a sucker for origin stories, and this reintroduction of the original Karate Kid movie was just absolutely amazing in its execution and development. What I loved about this season was the characters having parallels while also not being carbon copies of the original. For example, Miguel, like Daniel, was the new kid getting bullied and found a karate master to help him in Johnny. But Miguel was a unique character in its own way, as he was socially awkward and physically meek. Johnny shared parallels with Mr. Miyagi, but also showed very clear differences, as Johnny was working through his own issues during this time. The progression of his relationship with Miguel was always amazing to see. Aisha and Hawk were also great additions, with Eli going from bully nerd to an aggressive and confident fighter. Aisha's development also represented Johnny's theme of students training nerds to become badasses. Johnny's development was also without a doubt the best part of this season, and even though it was brief, him and Daniel sitting down and talking at a bar was definitely refreshing. Season 1 also had a perfect balance of slice and life and karate, and overall everything about Season 1 was great as a starting point of the franchise. However, this does not mean it was perfect, as I felt the final episodes with Robbie felt very rushed, with him learning pretty much everything, then getting kicked out, and then competing in the All Valley, all within 3 episodes. Miguel and Sam's breakup also felt like an ass pull. She walked down holding hands with another guy, and then he ends up hitting Sam. I felt like this was very unnecessary. Daniel being portrayed as a douchebag businessman also left a bad taste, as you would expect him to be better than that after being with Mr. Miyagi for so long. And while it does seem like something for Daniel from the original Karate Kid movies to do in character, as an adult, for him to still behave in such a childish way, such as raising the rent on an entire strip mall, was just simply disappointing. Overall, Season 1 was a great season, with only a few flaws related to pacing. The revival of the original Karate Kid franchise started off great in my opinion. This of course means that my favorite season of Cobra Kai is Season 4. While the rest of the rankings were difficult, Season 4 is without a doubt my pick for best Cobra Kai season. The end of Season 3 saw Daniel and Johnny team up against Kreese, and now that they finally combined dojos, it's made for some great but wholesome comedy between not only Johnny and Daniel, but also the students, with Johnny teaching Daniel's Miyagi-Do students, and Daniel teaching Johnny's Eagle Fang students. The Season 3 finale also saw Hawk leave Cobra Kai to join Eagle Fang, which ended up coming to bite him as he was jumped by Cobra Kai and had his infamous mohawk cut off. This would lead to Eli becoming perhaps Cobra Kai's best written character this season, as he had to learn to become confident on his own as Eli Moskowitz without hiding behind his Hawk persona, which reached its pinnacle during the All Valley tournament where he was able to beat Robbie to become the All Valley champion. What's great about Season 4 is that Eli wasn't the only character to receive development. Tori learned to depend on others, as seen during her interactions with Amanda, and learning to control her anger, managing her emotions, combined with her newfound relationship with Robbie, eliminated any distractions and just allowed her to focus on training for the All Valley. And I don't know about anyone else, but for me personally, I always liked Robbie as a bad guy, and this season was no exception, as Robbie started teaching Miyagi-Do to Cobra Kai, truly innovating the fighting styles forever by combining them. We also see Robbie becoming a mentor of his own to a young boy named Kenny, who is actually the younger brother of Sean, the guy who Robbie fought in Juvie. Sam also started to break out of her shell in Season 4, as before she would always listen to Daniel and even inherited his stubbornness, which changed after this season when she starts training with Johnny, much to her dad's disapproval. Not only did Sam withstand Johnny's training, she even enjoyed it. While the spotlight wasn't on Miguel this season, his character still matured, as he came to accept Johnny and his mother's relationship, as well as learning Miyagi-Do from Daniel, and at the end realized that karate just isn't everything to him, as he sets off to find his biological father. The romantic relationships this season was also perfect, especially Robbie and Tori. I really loved that moment where they made their entrance to prom all dripped out, and at first they were only out to spite Miguel and Sam, but eventually grew to actually care for each other. And of course their chemistry was so much stronger than Miguel and Sam's. While not quite at the level of Season 5, Season 4 still had some of the best fight choreography I've seen from the show, which was demonstrated during the All Valley tournament. And finally, I can't talk about Season 4 without mentioning the highlight of this season, Terry Silver. We learned after Karate Kid 3 he was in a bad place, but put himself into therapy and was finally at peace, but quickly turned into a complete menace after Kreese came to visit him, unlocking traumatic memories. We see just how unhinged Terry is, as he invites Johnny to the old dojo and beats him up in front of Kreese, and of course by the end of the All Valley tournament, he ends up betraying Kreese, framing him for an attempted murder charge. As great as this season was, I do have to admit it wasn't flawless. As I mentioned before, while most characters were given great arcs, Miguel sadly had to take the back seat this season. As such, we didn't really see much of him besides his story involving Johnny. The quality of fights was also slightly inconsistent throughout the season until the near end. We would start off with a banger in Robbie vs Cobra Kai, then a lot of fights after that would just be off-screen matches, and the final critique I have of Season 4 is that at times it felt like too much of a soap opera. But this eventually faded out near the end of the season as it drew closer to the All Valley tournament. Overall, Season 4 was in my opinion the best Cobra Kai season, with many characters peaking in their respective development and all becoming much more unique and complex. The fight choreography combined with amazing villains made for a very epic finale.